going to have fun with the painting that we're creating today, because not only can you do this on a canvas like I'm going to be showing you here, but you can also paint this onto your very own greetings card. I've simply taken an A4 piece of card and I've folded it in half, and I've used the front to paint my design on. Like always, before we jump into our painting, I'm just going to talk you through what I'm going to use to create this. So I've got my 8 by 10 size canvas here. I have a pencil just to draw in my initial design. And I have 3 different size paintbrushes, a square shaped bigger one, a kind of slanted middle shaped one, and then a smaller pointy one. I have some kitchen towel here just to dab my brushes on, a pot of water, my palette which I'll be popping my paints into, and my acrylic paints. These are the paints that actually come in our Brush and Bubbles art kit, but you can use any kind of paints that you like. For my painting today, I'm only going to use 4 paint shades. So I've got black and white, and then I have a bright yellow green and a primary blue. I'll be mixing the primary blue and green together to make a nice pastel turquoise shade, but if you want to, you can do a completely different colour for your background. You can go purple or pink or yellow or red or any shade that you wish. I'll be breaking this painting down, starting with the shape of our polar bear. Also, I'll show you how I'm mixing up my colours, how I'm applying the colours, and how I'm also adding in the finishing touches. So let's start by adding our paint colours to our palette. I'm going to start with quite a lot of white paint because I want to make my background nice and pastel, and then I'm going to be painting in my polar bear with the white as well. I'm now adding a tiny little bit of black. This is just going to be for all of the details of the polar bear, including its paws and its nose, eyes and mouth. This is the fun bit because you can decide what colour you want to do for your background. Like I mentioned, I'm going to be doing a pastel turquoise colour. So I'm adding this very bright light green shade to my palette, and also some of my primary blue, and I'll be mixing this in with some white paint. So this is your chance to decide what colour you want to do for your background, and you can simply add that paint colour to your palette. We're going to start with our pencil and just carefully sketch out the shape of our polar bear. Now we don't want to push down too hard with this because it will mark the card or the canvas that you're using, so we just want to use a really light touch. I'm going to start with the top of the polar bear's head. And it's got quite a flat head, so I'm just going to start by doing a slightly curved line for the top of the head. I'm then going to bring it down so it's almost a little bit like a sausage shape on either side. You can see I'm just pushing down very lightly. And then for the paws, I'm just going to scoop it up and around, and I'm just going to do another sausage-like shape, but it's going to come round slightly at the top. So it curves around and then comes back in. And then you can just do a line all the way down, and this line doesn't need to be straight. We can then do exactly the same on the other side. So I'm just going to bring this paw out a little bit. Again, just making it slightly wider at the top, and it's going to curve round. Come back in, and you can also just do a kind of lumpy line coming down on that side. What we can then do is add the ears, so the ears go on either side of the head, and these are just semicircles. Like so. Remember, we're going to be filling in the background and also our polar bear, so you don't have to worry too much about these marks. We can always change them. I'm going to start by mixing up the colour for my background. So I'm taking my slightly bigger brush and moving over to my palette. I'm just going to pick up a large amount of white paint. We want to mix up enough paint to cover the whole background of our canvas or our card. And then to this, I'm just going to gradually start adding a little bit of my light green and also a little bit of light blue. I'm going to give it a good mix. Now the great thing about painting is you can keep changing your colour until you're happy with what you've created. So I think I'm going to go a little bit lighter with my background. So I'm going to add some more white, and I'm also going to add a little bit more of my green just because I love that kind of green turquoise tone. So I'm just adding that white and the green and I'm giving it a good mix Remember, you can do this with any of the colours that you're using. And if you don't like the colour that you've mixed up, you can always start again until you're happy. I'm now just going to add a drop of water into my mixture just to keep the paint nice and fluid. I'm going to really stir it in. If you're doing this on a piece of card or a piece of paper, you just want to be careful not to add too much water to your paint, just because it might make the card or the paper crinkle. As soon as you're happy with your colour, we're now just going to paint the whole background of our painting. And I'm just going to be really careful as I'm coming up to the edge of my polar bear. So you just want to make sure you're not going over the lines that you've already drawn in with your pencil too much. So just be nice and careful when you get to them. I like to fan out the bristles of the brush by pushing the brush onto the canvas, and you can kind of swirl it around just to make sure you don't go over those lines too much. But we're just going to spend a little moment filling in all of our background until we're happy that it's all nice and covered up. And if you're doing this on some card, you can just bring it right to the edges. And if you're doing it on a canvas, you might even just want to turn the canvas on its side and paint the edges as well. It's totally up to you. Some artists like painting the side of their canvases and some choose not to. So it's personal preference. You can decide what you'd rather do for your painting. And if you want to, whenever you get to any of the details which are a little bit more fiddly, you can always pick up your smaller brush and then just fill in those fiddly bits with the smaller brush, just so you have a little bit more control when it comes to painting in these areas. So I like to do this around where the paws are and also around where the ears are too. Once you've done that, you can just give your small brush a wash in the water, pop it down on the kitchen towel, and then you can just move back to your bigger brush whenever you're ready to fill in the rest of the background. Once we've filled in all of our background, we just want to leave it for a moment to dry. So I'm just going to take this opportunity to give my brush a really good wash. We want to make sure we've got all of our background colour off of our brush, and I like to just give it a little tap on the base of the cup. And this just helps lift off any of the excess paint that's being stubborn. So we can either leave our background to dry naturally just in the air, or if you want to speed up the process, you can always give it a gentle dry with the hairdryer just on a low heat. Once our background is dry, we're now going to move on to filling in the fur of our polar bear. So I've actually just given myself a little bit of clean white paint so that I can do this. So if you haven't got enough white paint available, just give yourself a little bit more for this. And just like we did with our background, I'm going to start with my medium brush, which is now nice and clean. I'm just going to pick up some of this white. I'm just going to fill in all of the inside of the polar bear, so keeping within the lines. But what I'm also going to do is whenever I get to the edges, I might actually just pick up one of my smaller brushes just so that I can get right into all of the little areas without going over the lines. So I use the big brush to do the bigger areas, and then the smaller brush to do the kind of smaller areas. So you can just spend a moment filling all of this in. And if you're working with a canvas, you can add a little bit of water to your white paint. Just helps it stay nice and fluid. But if you are working with a piece of card, I'd be careful not to add too much water to your paint, just so it doesn't crinkle that paper too much. So again, we're just going to spend a little bit of time filling in our polar bear. And just when you get to the edges, you can be nice and careful. So I'm just picking up one of my smaller brushes, and then I can just have a little bit more control when I get to these edges. And you can take your time, there's no rush with this. And because our background should be nice and dry now, you can actually overlap it slightly. We want it to look like the polar bear is in front of the background. So just kind of overlap it a little bit. And then just enjoy filling in the rest of the polar bear with the white paint. Remember not to worry if your polar bear isn't straight or neat or it's a bit wonky. We want it to look nice and natural, and it's got its arms up in the air, so we just want to make sure we're not worrying too much about it being symmetrical or anything like that, because it wouldn't naturally be symmetrical. There's going to be some movement in there. There's going to be some lumps and bumps. So don't worry too much about your shape. It all comes together once we put in all of the details. So I finished filling in the inner part of my polar bear. I'm just going to wash off my brush that I've been using, or both of the brushes that I've been using. And again, we just want to wait for it to dry nicely before we move on to the details, just so that the two paint colours don't merge into each other. So you might just want to leave it again, just to let it dry in the air. Or if you want to speed up the process, you can just use the hairdryer. We're now going to move on to painting in all of the details. So this is going to be the nose and mouth, the eyes and the paw pads. So I like to just go straight in with my tiny little brush and some black paint. But if you want to, you can draw out these shapes with the pencil first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the nose. And I'm just going to pick up some of my black paint with my tiniest brush. And then moving over to where the polar bear's face is, I'm just going to kind of focus this more towards the lower half of the face. And what you can always do is start smaller if you want to, because it will naturally get bigger and bigger. And we're going to be doing an upside down triangle shape, but it's going to have really curved edges. So this is what I mean by that. So we've got a longer bit at the top, curves around and comes to a little point like an upside down triangle. And then what you can do when you've got that shape, you can just carefully fill it in with the black paint. And then if you want to make it bigger, you can just gradually make it bigger and bigger. Again, the nice thing about painting this is that we don't want it to look too neat. We want the polar bear to have loads of character. So don't worry if your nose is wobbly or wonky. Whatever you produce will be amazing. So you've just got to go with it. This is where the polar bear's character is really going to take shape. So don't be too hard on yourself when you're doing all of these details. So there I have my nose. I'm now going to do two little dots for the eyes. So the eyes kind of sit on either side of the face. They're quite wide. and far apart. So I'm going to focus these just where I've got the edge of the nose. I'm just going to bring it up a bit diagonally. I'm just going to pop my first eye here. Again, you can just kind of dab the paintbrush on and start smaller and make it a little bit bigger. Then the other eye's on the other side, over here. You can always just take a little step back, have a little look, and if you want to make the eyes a bit bigger, then you can just always carefully make them a little bit bigger if you want to. So the mouth is a really, really fiddly part of the painting. So if you would rather draw your mouth in with some black pen, you can definitely do that instead of using the paint. We're just going to do a little smiley face. I'm going to show you now. And it's basically a J shape and then an opposite J shape. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to be using my black paint for this, but I just want to make sure I haven't got too much on my brush. Otherwise it's going to be really, really hard to draw this in because we want it quite small. So I'm just going to dash off any of the excess paint just so I've got a tiny, tiny amount on my smallest brush. And then moving back over to our polar bear, I'm just going to start by doing a tiny little line at the very, very base of the nose going down. So it's not very long, just like that. That's all it needs to be. I'm then going to pick up some more paint, just dashing off any of the excess so I haven't got too much on my brush again. And then I'm just going to do a curved line coming round to meet that first line we've just drawn, just like that. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. And there we have the mouth. So like I said, I've just used the very, very tip of my small brush, tiny bit of black paint on there. But if you don't want to and you don't want to do that and you don't feel comfortable with using the paintbrush and the paint, that's absolutely fine. You can go for a mixed media effect with your painting and you can use some black pen. So just either a biro or a ballpoint black pen to draw in the mouth. Next up we have the paws, and this is what I find the funnest part of the painting because I love the polar bear's paws. I think they're so cute. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the main pad. So this is the kind of this area of the polar bear's paws, and it's almost a little bit like a bean shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw in that bean shape now. So it kind of comes around from the side, mounds up at the top, comes down, almost looks a little bit like a turtle's back. And then it just curves around a little bit like that. Now the great thing with these paws is they come in different shapes and sizes, so it really doesn't matter what you're doing. We just want to get in that kind of wobbly shape there. And all of the edges are quite curved, so you can just really make sure they're nice and big and curved round. Something a little bit like that. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to do the actual paw bits coming off. This is where the polar bear's toes will be. And I like to just do kind of blobby dashes. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So the one in the middle is always going to be the bigger one. So you can almost do that one first. Big blobby kind of dash like that. And then we've got another one which is slightly smaller next to it on this side. And another one the same kind of size on that side. And then we've got two more smaller ones on either side of that. They kind of curve round with the polar bear's paws. And once you're happy with that, you can then go ahead and do exactly the same on the other side. So again, I'm going to start with the main big bit, just doing that kind of turtle shell shape, or a bean-like shape, whichever one you prefer. Again, if you don't want to use the paint for this, you can always use a felt tip pen or your pen. Just make sure whatever you're using you feel comfortable with. And just fill it all in. And then whenever you're ready, you can do the smaller paw areas as well. So I'm going to start in the middle, do a bigger blobby dash, and then along the sides I'm going to do a slightly smaller one coming off this side and there as well, and then the last ones, which are the smallest blobby dashes. So as a last finishing touch for the painting, I like to add snowdrops all over the background. And this is the really fun bit, because I'm not actually going to use the normal bristle end of the brush. I'm actually going to turn the brush over and I'm going to be dipping this end into the paint. Now I'll show you what this does. So I'm just going to dip the end of the paintbrush, the other end, into the white paint, just so you have a blob at the end. And then what you can do with this is very carefully just dot it all over the background, and it gives you these lovely circle blobs which look like snow. And you can add as many of these or as little of these as you like, or if you don't want to add them, you don't have to. And if you wanted to go a bit wild and do them in different multicolours, you could also do that. So have a little look at your own painting, decide what you think you'd like to do, and then you can do whatever you like. You don't have to follow along with what I'm doing. And there we have our polar bear painting. So the great thing about this painting is it works lovely on a canvas, and it also makes for an amazing greetings card as well. And what you can even do is do a whole collection of them in different background colours. So you could have some pinks, some yellows, some purples, reds, some darker greens, some darker blues. You can really have fun with it, and you can do a whole collection of paintings or greetings cards with different coloured backgrounds. Thank you so much everyone for joining me today, and if you do create this at home, then don't forget to tag us in your creations. We are at Brush and Bubbles on Instagram. Write to us in the comments, send us DMs. We love hearing from you and we love seeing all of your artwork.